The final hope. Captain Ilara Vos stood at the edge of the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the glowing, fiery remnants of her homeworld. The distant horizon was no longer a symbol of the Solarian Empire's might. It was a graveyard of what had been. The once beautiful emerald-green planet now lay in ruins, consumed by the relentless machines of the Virex. The Virex were an ancient race of war machines, unstoppable, merciless, and programmed for one purpose: annihilation. They had already destroyed hundreds of Solarian colonies across the galaxy. Every attempt to stop them had failed. Technology, tactics, even diplomacy, none of it worked. The Virex only advanced, crushing everything in their path with cold efficiency. "Captain, the last colony has fallen," reported Officer Lyon, his voice heavy with grief. He stood by the communications console, staring at the flickering screen that once showed vibrant images of their thriving settlements. Now, it only displayed blackness. "We've lost everything. There's nothing left, Ilara. Not even the capital." Ilara's jaw tightened. For years, she had led her people with pride, overseeing an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. But now, she was watching everything slip through her fingers. Her people, their culture, their history, their legacy, were being wiped out by an enemy that didn't care. She had failed them. "What do we do now?" Lyon asked, his voice shaking with desperation. Ilara's gaze softened for a moment, but the weight of the situation hardened her resolve. "We fight," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We fight until our last breath. But we also ask for help. We can't do this alone." The ancient rules of the Solarian Empire had always been clear: never interfere with the younger races. They had observed countless civilizations rise and fall, but they had always remained neutral, observing from afar. Their technology was far beyond most other species, but their laws kept them isolated. But now, everything had changed. Ilara turned toward the communications officer, her mind racing. The Solarians had never asked for help, never reached out to anyone beyond their own borders. But there was no choice now. The Virex had left them no room for pride, no room for hesitation. "Send a distress signal," Ilara ordered, her voice trembling with urgency. "Broadcast it to all channels, to every race, even the youngest. We need help. We need mercy." Lyon hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure, Captain? We've always kept to ourselves. Reaching out like this, it could be seen as weakness." Ilara clenched her fists. "We are beyond pride now. We need every hand, every ship, every weapon that can help us. The Virex are too strong. Our people are dying. If anyone is listening, we need them to hear us." With a heavy heart, she watched as Lyon activated the communication systems. The message was brief, simple, but it carried the weight of their last hope. "This is Captain Ilara Vos of the Solarian Fleet. We are under attack. Our worlds are falling. We beg for mercy. We offer all that we have in return. Please, help us." The message went out into the void, the silence of space swallowing their desperate cry. They had no idea if anyone would hear it, if anyone would care. They had no idea if they would survive long enough to receive a response. But in that moment, Ilara had to believe that someone somewhere would answer. The first spark of hope. The hum of the control room's machinery was the only sound that broke the heavy silence. Captain Ilara Vos stood at the communication station, her fingers frozen over the console. She had watched as the last few Solarian colonies crumbled beneath the relentless assault of the Virex. Each wave of destruction chipped away at her resolve, but she refused to surrender. Her people, her ancestors, had survived worse. They had built an empire from nothing. But even the might of the Solarian fleets could not hold back a machine bent on annihilation. As her eyes traced the flickering display of fallen worlds, Ilara's mind wandered. Could anyone stop the Virex? She had always believed in the power of her people, their technology, their unity, their ingenuity. But against the Virex, they were helpless. She turned away from the screen and paced the room, her boots clicking against the metallic floor, each step echoing her growing frustration. "Captain," Officer Lyon's voice cut through the quiet, shaky but filled with urgency. "We've got something strange. A signal. It's weak, but it's there." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She turned quickly, rushing to the communication panel. "Patch it through," she commanded, her voice tense with anticipation. The signal was raw, fragmented, and barely holding together. The language was primitive, full of static, but it was unmistakable. The words were slow and broken, but the message was clear. "This, Captain Eric Hayes, of the Terran ship Sentinel, receive your distress. Help coming." Ilara blinked. Her first thought was disbelief. Terrans. The humans were a fledgling race, barely out of their home solar system. Their ships were clunky, their weapons rudimentary. What could they possibly offer in the face of the Virex? Their technology wasn't even close to the Solarians, let alone the machines that had turned their planets into ashes. Lyon stood beside her, still staring at the screen with wide eyes. The Terrans, they're barely even on the map. How could they possibly help us against them? Ilara ran a hand over her face, trying to absorb the absurdity of the message. It didn't make sense. The Terrans, the ones who still bickered over borders and resources, the ones who had just begun to venture into deep space exploration. But the reality was undeniable. The message was clear. Someone somewhere had heard their cry for help. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "We'll find out," she said, her voice firm. "We'll find out what they're capable of." The bridge fell silent for a moment, the tension palpable. The thought of relying on the Terrans seemed reckless, even foolish. But there was no other choice. The Virex showed no mercy, no sign of slowing down. "We'll need to prepare for their arrival," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "It doesn't matter what ship they're flying. If they're willing to fight, then they're already more help than we've had in weeks." Officer Lyon hesitated before speaking. "But Captain, the Virex will destroy them as easily as they've destroyed us. They won't stand a chance." Ilara turned sharply, her eyes blazing. "They're coming to help us because we asked, because we need them. And if the Terrans are brave enough to answer a call that no one else will, then we will fight beside them, no matter the cost." Her words were filled with a quiet resolve that cut through the doubt swirling around the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, a flicker of something other than despair moved through her. Hope. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. The Terrans had heard their cry. They had chosen to act. "We'll make our stand," Ilara continued, her voice hardening with determination. "No matter how small their ship or their weapons, we will fight, together." Lyon gave a nod, though his face was still filled with disbelief. "Aye, Captain. Together." Ilara turned back to the view screen. Her thoughts raced. She didn't know how they would stop the Virex. She didn't know what the Terrans could bring to the table. But in this endless black void, one thing had changed. Someone had heard them, and for the first time in weeks, that was enough. "We'll show them what it means to fight," she whispered to herself, more to the stars than to anyone else. "We'll show them what it means to be Solarian." The hum of the Sentinel signal grew stronger as it slowly traversed the vast distance between them. In the endless expanse of space, they were still so far away. But that faint, crackling signal was the first real spark of hope they had received in days. It didn't matter how many machines the Virex had or how advanced their weaponry was. The Solarians and the Terrans would fight, and together, they would find a way to defeat the enemy. "Captain," Lyon said, breaking the silence again, "we've got a response from their ship. They've locked onto our coordinates. They'll be here in 12 hours. Ilara nodded, her gaze firm, her heart pounding in her chest. "Prepare for their arrival. We don't have time to waste." And as the Sentinel made its way through the stars, Ilara Vos allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that they might survive this. That the Solarian Empire, though shattered, could rise again. Because in this dark moment, the humans had shown them what it truly meant to fight. The Terran resolve. The Sentinel was a far cry from the sleek, advanced warships that the Solarians were accustomed to. Its hull was dented and scratched, showing the wear of countless voyages. The ship's engines sputtered, struggling to push it faster through the dark void of space. Captain Eric Hayes gripped the edge of his command console, staring at the blinking lights that signaled their approach to the Solarian fleet. "Captain," Lieutenant Zara Neal said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We're entering the Solarian system. The Virex presence is overwhelming. Our sensors are picking up massive swarms of them. We're not even in range of the enemy, and they're already all over us." Eric's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. The Sentinel wasn't a warship. It wasn't built for combat. It was a transport vessel, a scientific exploration ship, designed for peaceful missions. The idea that it would now serve as humanity's response to a galactic-scale war was absurd. But there was no turning back now. "Stay focused, Lieutenant," Eric said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "We've made a promise, and we're going to keep it. Our job is to get to the Solarian fleet. We've got people depending on us. So, no matter what, we keep going." Eric's crew had gathered around him, all young, eager, and full of determination. They had been expecting a routine exploration mission, a chance to map out new systems and learn about distant worlds. Instead, they were heading into the heart of a war zone, with the fate of an entire civilization hanging in the balance. The stakes were higher than anything they had ever imagined. "We're entering firing range," Zara reported, her voice shaking slightly. "Should we prepare for combat?" "No," Eric answered immediately. "We're not here to fight. We're here to help. Our job is to get the Solarians' coordinates and relay them to Earth Command. If we're going to stand any chance against the Virex, we'll need reinforcements." As they drew closer to the Solarian fleet, Eric couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in his chest. The stakes had escalated quickly. The Solarians were one of the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy, and now they were being hunted by machines more powerful than anything he had ever seen. They were asking for help, and in return, they offered everything they had: technology, knowledge, even their lives. But the question was, what could the humans bring to the table? What could a handful of young Terrans do against an enemy that had wiped out entire civilizations? His mind wandered back to the early days of humanity's space exploration. The Terrans had faced countless setbacks, broken ships, failing engines, and wars of their own. And yet, time and time again, they had pulled through. It wasn't their advanced technology or superior strength that had kept them going. It was something else. It was their sheer, unshakable will. They never stopped. They never gave up. And that's why they were here now. "Captain," Zara said, her voice now edged with urgency. "The Solarian ship just sent us coordinates. They've spotted the Virex patrols ahead. We need to change course, immediately." Eric's eyes snapped to the navigation screen. There was a flash of red. Too many Virex ships in close proximity. If they continued on their current path, they would be walking into an ambush. "We won't make it there in time," Eric muttered under his breath. He looked to his crew. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. If we're going to survive, we'll have to outthink them. This ship isn't fast, but it's sturdy. We'll rely on that." The crew sprang into action, shifting the course of the Sentinel at the last possible moment. The ship groaned as the engines strained to change direction, and the hull shuddered in protest. The Virex were closing in fast, too fast. They were relentless, their mechanical limbs moving with precision as they tracked the Terran vessel. "Incoming," Zara shouted, her voice tense. "They're locking onto us. We need to make them think we're a bigger threat than we really are." Eric's eyes widened as the Virex warships loomed closer, their sleek, metallic bodies gleaming in the blackness of space. He knew the odds were slim, but something inside him refused to accept the idea of turning tail. If they couldn't outrun the enemy, they would have to outsmart them. "Listen up, everyone," he called out, standing tall in front of his crew. "We've got one shot at this. We're going to make them think we're armed with more than just a few laser cannons. Zara, reroute all our power to the forward shields. We're going to get their attention, and we're going to make sure they know the Sentinel isn't a sitting duck." The crew worked swiftly, their hands flying across the consoles as they followed Eric's orders. The ship's artificial intelligence system, an old but reliable program, began to generate a series of false readings on the Virex's sensors. The Sentinel wasn't equipped with cloaking technology, but they could mimic enough power output to create the illusion of a much larger, more dangerous ship. The Virex ships continued their approach, their sensors scanning the Terran vessel. The Sentinel wasn't nearly as fast as their pursuers, but Eric's crew managed to position the ship just right. For a moment, the Virex seemed to hesitate, their focus flickering as the false readings fed into their systems. "Hold steady," Eric muttered. "Just a few more seconds." As the Virex ships closed in, the Sentinel's shields powered up to full capacity, glowing with a faint blue aura. In that instant, Eric ordered the ship to fire a series of warning shots, sending pulse beams into the blackness. The beams were weak, ineffective against the Virex, but the goal wasn't to hit the ships. It was to make them think the Sentinel had more firepower than it did. It worked. The Virex paused for just long enough for the Terran ship to break free of their targeting range. The Sentinel wasn't fast, but the Virex had underestimated it. Eric quickly gave the command to increase speed, angling the ship in the direction of the Solarian fleet. "That's it," Eric said, allowing himself a small, weary smile. "Now we make our way to the Solarian coordinates. We might not have much, but we have brains. And if there's one thing the Virex won't expect, it's humans fighting like humans." The crew, adrenaline still pumping through their veins, exchanged glances of disbelief and pride. The Sentinel wasn't the mightiest ship in the galaxy, but it was the one that was here. It was the one that had answered the call. And now, with their first victory behind them, Eric and his crew knew one thing for certain. They were ready to face whatever came next. The Solarian Alliance. The Sentinel glided through the blackness of space, its battered hull now a symbol of humanity's unyielding spirit. After their near miss with the Virex patrol, Eric Hayes allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The Solarian fleet was in sight now, and with every passing moment, the urgency of their mission grew. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back, about proving that even the smallest of the galaxy's civilizations had the potential to change the course of history. "Captain," Zara said from the comm station, her fingers flying over the console, "we've established a secure channel with the Solarians. They're waiting for us." Eric nodded, his heart rate steady despite the weight of the moment. The Solarians were an ancient race, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. Their cities floated in the sky, their ships crossed galaxies in days, and their fleets were nearly invincible. The Terrans, on the other hand, were still learning how to survive in the vastness of space. They had made mistakes, suffered defeats, and learned from them. But they had never faced something like the Virex. "Bring it up," Eric ordered, as he turned toward the holoscreen that flickered to life in front of him. A pale blue figure appeared, a Solarian officer, her smooth features betraying no emotion. Her name was Tuluris, and from what Eric had been briefed, she was one of the highest-ranking commanders among the Solarian military. Her people had seen their fair share of wars, but nothing had prepared them for the Virex. "Captain Hayes," Tuluris' voice echoed across the bridge, cool and impersonal. "I am Commander Tuluris of the Solarian fleet. You are the Terrans." Eric nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, Commander. We're here to help. We received your distress signal. We may not have the firepower you're used to, but we're willing to fight. Whatever it takes." There was a pause on the other end. Talaris studied him through the holo for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. Eric's crew held their breath. This was the moment that could determine everything. If the Solarians rejected them, if they refused to cooperate, the Sentinel would have no choice but to turn back. Humanity would be left to fend for itself against an unstoppable enemy. Finally, Talaris spoke, her voice unwavering. "You are bold, Captain Hayes. I admire that. But do not mistake bravery for wisdom. The Virax are not a force to be taken lightly. They have already destroyed entire systems, obliterated species that were far more advanced than your Terran fleet. If you wish to help us, you must first understand that you are not simply offering your aid. You are becoming a target, one that the Virax will not hesitate to destroy." Eric met her gaze through the screen, unflinching. "I understand. We've been fighting our own wars for centuries. But we've never fought a battle we couldn't find a way to win." Talaris gave a slight nod, as though she hadn't expected such a response. "Very well, Captain Hayes. We will coordinate with you. But know this, your people are now involved. There is no turning back." A hum of activity filled the bridge as Talaris's transmission ended, and the Solarian fleet's tactical display began to materialize on the holoscreen. Thousands of ships, their sleek designs and glowing energy signatures lighting up the dark void of space, formed an imposing formation. It was an awe-inspiring sight, but it was also a grim reminder of just how high the stakes were. "Sir," Lieutenant Zora said, her voice crackling with the excitement of the moment, "we're in range of their main fleet. They're asking us to send our coordinates. They've begun synchronizing their jump points for us to travel together." Eric took a deep breath. This was it. Humanity was now officially part of an intergalactic alliance, not because of their advanced ships or superior weapons, but because they had chosen to show up when no one else would. "Send them the coordinates," Eric ordered. "Let's make sure they know we're serious about this." As the Sentinel prepared to jump into hyperspace, Eric turned to his crew. "Listen up, everyone. This isn't just a fight for the Solarians. This is a fight for everyone. If the Virax can take down a civilization like theirs, there's nothing stopping them from coming after us. Our victory here today could change the course of the galaxy. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting to show the universe what humanity can do when we stand together." There was a solemn silence as Eric's words settled over the crew. For the first time in days, hope flickered through the ranks. They weren't alone. They had allies now. The Solarians, for all their power and pride, had accepted their help. It was a fragile alliance, built on desperation, but it was their only chance. "Captain," Zura said, breaking the silence, "the jump point is ready. We're about to enter hyperspace. The Solarians are already moving." Eric nodded and stepped toward the command chair. "Engage," he said. The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as the Sentinel jumped into hyperspace, accompanied by the Solarian fleet. The ship shuddered as the engines kicked into overdrive, and for a brief moment, the crew felt the weight of the unknown pressing against them. The Virax awaited them, waiting to bring the galaxy to its knees. But they weren't alone anymore. They had an entire fleet behind them, a Solarian armada, and most importantly, human ingenuity, bravery, and determination on their side. The war had only just begun. Into the Virax storm. The stars shifted as the Sentinel and the Solarian fleet hurtled through hyperspace, their combined forces on a collision course with the Virax. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once, as if the very fabric of space was holding its breath in anticipation. Eric Hayes sat at the helm, his knuckles white from gripping the armrest. His mind raced, going over every possible scenario. The Solarians had armed their fleet with weapons of unimaginable power, but nothing in their arsenal could guarantee success. The Virax were relentless, and their machines were both fast and deadly. "Captain," Zara's voice interrupted his thoughts, "we're 5 minutes from dropping out of hyperspace. The Solarians have signaled they're preparing for battle." Eric nodded, though he felt no comfort in the fact. Battle with the Virex wasn't just a clash of weapons. It was a fight for survival, a contest of willpower. The Virex didn't just kill. They erased civilizations, scouring planets of all life, leaving only death and silence in their wake. "We'll need to make a decision," Eric muttered to himself. "Do we attack with the Solarians, or do we play a different hand?" Zora glanced over at him, sensing his hesitation. "We don't have much choice, Captain. The Solarians need us, and the Virex aren't going to wait around for us to figure it out." Eric met her gaze. "I know, but we don't stand a chance if we follow their plan to the letter. The Solarians rely on their technology, but the Virex are designed to counter everything advanced." The hum of the ship's engines vibrated beneath their feet, steadying Eric's thoughts. This wasn't just about weapons and strategy. It was about doing what humans did best, thinking outside the box. He turned back to the crew. "I know we're outgunned," he said, his voice firm. "But we faced impossible odds before. If we're going to win this, we need to use our biggest strength, our unpredictability. We're going to do things the Solarians won't expect. We're going to surprise them." The crew exchanged wary glances, but no one spoke. They trusted Eric. They had to. As the Sentinel exited hyperspace, the vast expanse of space revealed itself, a battlefield beyond comprehension. The Solarian Armada had formed a tight formation, ships glinting with the brilliance of their advanced energy shields. The Virex, however, were already there, a swarm of metallic predators ready to engage. They didn't speak, didn't plan. They simply attacked. Thousands of Virex ships swarmed toward the Solarian fleet, their cold, calculating movements forming an impenetrable wall of metal and energy. "Captain," Zora called out, urgency in her voice. "The Virex are launching a full assault. We got about 20 minutes before we're in range. What are your orders?" Eric stared at the tactical map. The Virex were already closing in. Every movement they made was precise, controlled. They were calculating every attack, anticipating the Solarians' every move. Eric's plan needed to disrupt that. He needed to make the Sentinel more than just a ship. It needed to become a symbol, a moving disruption in the enemy's calculations. "Zara, I need you to sync the Sentinel's power systems with the Solarians' battle grid," Eric ordered. "We're going to make the Virex think we're a part of their formation." Zora's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting we—" "Yes," Eric interrupted. "We're going to piggyback off their systems. The Virex won't know what hit them. They'll think we're one of the Solarian ships until we hit them with everything we've got." There was a beat of hesitation, but then Zora quickly nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "You're asking us to mask the Sentinel from their sensors, to make them think we're part of their enemy's fleet." "Exactly. If we're going to survive, we need to use the Virex's own predictability against them." Eric turned to Lieutenant Juno, his second in command, who was monitoring the Solarian communication feeds. "Juno, tell the Solarians we'll be using their tactics against them. We're ready to fight, but we do it on our own terms." Juno hesitated, then nodded, tapping a few commands into the console. "Understood, Captain. Sending the message now." The minutes that followed felt like hours. The Sentinel's engines hummed with anticipation as it slowly edged into the heart of the battlefield, moving with the precision of a machine. Eric's heart pounded in his chest, but his focus never wavered. Every part of him was keyed into the battle, every decision crucial. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. And then, it happened. The first wave of Virex ships swarmed toward the Solarians, their weapons blazing in a synchronized barrage. The Solarian shields flared in response, a brilliant display of energy and light. It was then that the Sentinel made its move. "Now," Eric shouted. With a sudden burst of speed, the Sentinel broke free from its cover, firing its weakened but still deadly energy weapons straight into the heart of the Virex formation. The Virex, expecting another Solarian ship to join the fray, were thrown off balance. The Sentinel's attack wasn't powerful enough to cause major damage, but it was enough to create a rift in the Virex's tactics. The Virex hesitated, a rare misstep in their otherwise flawless coordination. It was enough. The Solarian ships, now freed from the Virex's focused assault, turned the tide, unleashing a storm of firepower. Eric watched, heart racing, as the battlefield became chaos. The Solarians' advanced weaponry ripped through the Virex ranks. But it wasn't just the Solarians' superior technology that made a difference. The Virex had been thrown into disarray. Their flawless tactics were disrupted by the unexpected, a human strategy. Unpredictability had become their greatest weapon. "Captain," Zara's voice broke through the chaos. "We've taken down 2 of their scouts. The Solarians are pushing them back." Eric allowed himself a brief, exhausted smile. "Keep pushing forward. Don't let up. We have to break their formation." As the Sentinel dove back into the heart of the battle, Eric's thoughts were clearer than ever. The Solarians might have the most powerful ships, but humans had something else, something that no machine or algorithm could predict. Their ability to adapt, improvise, and think in ways that even the most advanced species couldn't fathom. The battle was far from over, but the tide had begun to turn. The Virex might have been relentless, but for the first time, they had met an enemy that refused to be calculated. And that, Eric knew, was only the beginning. The heart of darkness. The Sentinel lurched, its engines straining against the weight of space itself. The Virex were relentless. The Solarian fleet, though vast and powerful, had been forced into a defensive position. The tide of battle had shifted, but victory was far from assured. Eric Hayes stood at the helm, his eyes narrowed as he watched the tactical displays flicker with the steady pulse of battle. The Virex weren't retreating. No, they were adapting. And that meant only one thing. They were learning. "Captain," Zara's voice came through the comms, sharp with urgency. "The Virex are pulling back, but they're not done yet. They're reorganizing, and I'm detecting an anomaly on the far side of the battlefield. Something's coming through their fleet, something big." Eric gripped the armrest of his chair tighter. "What do you mean, something big?" "Another wave of ships." Zara paused, her voice tense. "Not ships. A single craft. It's enormous. Unlike anything we've seen before. It's coming right for us." The screen in front of Eric blinked with data. A blip appeared, steadily growing larger as it moved toward the Sentinel's position. Eric's pulse quickened. The Solarians had given everything they had. Yet here came the Virex with something new. Something more dangerous. He knew the Solarians had vast fleets, but this new threat felt different. It felt like the Virex had something they had been holding back. "Get me a visual," Eric ordered. A new screen flickered to life, showing a monstrous silhouette in space. It was massive, a hulking dark shape drifting toward them like a shadow. Its surface was smooth and metallic, reflecting the dying light of the stars, its massive engines glowing a sickly green as it approached with terrifying speed. "Captain," Juno called, her voice steady but filled with awe. "I'm reading an energy signature off the charts. Whatever that thing is, it's unlike anything we've ever encountered." Zora's voice was tinged with dread. "That's no ship. It's a weapon. I can feel it in my bones. That thing is built for destruction." Eric didn't hesitate. "All hands, brace for impact. Zara, I need you to track its trajectory. Juno, get me a direct line to the Solarian fleet. We need reinforcements. Now." The Sentinel's engines roared as they pushed the ship into evasive maneuvers. The massive Virex weapon loomed ahead, an overwhelming presence that threatened to swallow them whole. Eric's mind raced, every fiber of his being focused on survival. This wasn't just another skirmish. This wasn't a fight for territory or resources. This was about humanity's future, about proving they could stand in the face of annihilation. "Captain," Zara shouted, her fingers dancing over the console. "It's accelerating. It's locked onto our position. Eric glanced at the energy readings on the screen. The Virex weapon was charging, its massive cannons preparing to fire. If they didn't move fast, they'd be incinerated before they even had a chance to retaliate. "We won't outrun it," Eric muttered. "We need to make them think we're done for." Zora's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Deploy all remaining decoys. Make it look like we've been hit. Disable all non-essential systems. I want them to think we're out of commission." The crew stared at him, confusion written across their faces. But Eric was already moving, trusting in his instincts. He turned to Juno. "Send the signal. Tell the Solarians we're faking the shutdown. They need to use it as a distraction. The Virex will think they've won." Juno hesitated but nodded. "Understood, Captain." The Sentinel's systems flickered, its shields dropping as Eric initiated the shutdown sequence. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath as every light on the bridge dimmed. The Virex weapon's massive cannons began to glow brighter, preparing for the final strike. "Now," Eric whispered under his breath. The Virex weapon fired, its blast ripping through the void with a thunderous explosion of energy. The shockwave rocked the Sentinel, sending it spinning through space. For a moment, everything went black. The ship was silent, its power systems disabled, its shields down. The Virex weapon had struck, and as it passed by, Eric knew it had to have been fooled. It didn't take long for the Virex to realize their victory was short-lived. The Sentinel hadn't been destroyed. In fact, the Solarian fleet had been waiting, taking advantage of the Virex's overconfidence. As the massive Virex weapon slowed down to turn and observe the destruction it had caused, the Solarians struck with the full force of their remaining ships. "Captain," Zora called out, a mix of relief and excitement in her voice. "The Solarians have launched their counterattack. The Virex are scattering. We've caught them off guard." Eric allowed himself a rare smile, but the battle wasn't over yet. "Don't celebrate yet," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We've given them a surprise, but we still need to take that weapon down. If we don't, we'll be dealing with it again. And next time, it won't miss." Zora looked at him, a spark of determination in her eyes. "How do we stop it?" Eric didn't hesitate. "We hit it where it hurts. The Virex rely on overwhelming firepower, but that weapon's power source is likely unstable. If we can get close enough, we might be able to disable it from the inside." Jumo's voice came through, calm and resolute. "We'll need to send a boarding party." Eric nodded. "Prepare a strike team. We're going in." The crew set to work quickly, activating the Sentinel's auxiliary engines and stabilizing its position. The Virex weapon, still attempting to regroup, was distracted by the Solarian assault. It was their moment. Eric didn't wait for further orders. He gathered his team, and they boarded the shuttle, hurtling toward the Virex weapon. The shuttle's dark silhouette blended into the chaos of the battlefield, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Eric saw the universe as it truly was, a place of infinite possibilities and endless peril. Humanity's strength lay in its ability to surprise, to strike when all seemed lost. It was that strength, that unyielding desire to never give up, that would determine the outcome of this war. As the shuttle closed in on the Virex weapon, Eric's pulse quickened. The stakes had never been higher. This mission would either end in glory or catastrophe. But for humanity, there was no turning back.